Hello there, people. Welcome to Flight Box. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. It has been a long time since I've done an episode of this particular show here at theflightcast.com. This is my TV show, basically my TV review show, if you will. I've done 32 of these episodes in like the last couple of years since I first started this idea, because what I was doing beforehand was I was just reviewing all of these shows and movies on the main show, and then I got this idea a couple of years ago to actually divide them up, right, and do like movie reviews on Flight Review and TV reviews on Flight Box. I also wanted to do and did a few comic reviews as well on a show called Flight Report. But I would do these episodes across the regular, topside podcasting channels and then also on Patreon. And there's a decent amount of episodes of this particular show, Flight Box, on Patreon. I remember I talked about Moon Knight. I talked about the Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, I think were some of the others. I've also talked about Star Trek Discovery, Lower Decks. I've also talked about older shows like Big Bang Theory, Superman and Lois, and all that, right? But it hasn't been... last time I did a new episode of this particular episode was August 3rd of last year, and that was for Batman Caped Crusader, and that was a Patreon exclusive. So this is the first time in a while that I will have done an actual episode. In fact, I think the last topside episode of this show that I did was when I reviewed X-Men 97 last year. That was the last full-blown episode of Flightbox that I did topside. So I guess it's fitting that I return for a new episode of Flightbox here topside for another Marvel series, a current Marvel series that we are now 3 episodes deep into the most recent season of, and that, of course, is Daredevil Born Again. Yes, indeed. But before I dive into what will not be a spoiler-free review, I definitely have some things that I want to talk about, and it's kind of difficult to do a show like this spoiler-free with respect to a show like this. So definitely don't listen to this episode until you have at least watched through episode 3 of Daredevil Born Again, unless you don't care about spoilers and you want to hear some thoughts on what I have to say about what's going on so far this season. But before diving into that, always want to remind everybody here, in case you're a first-time listener, that this show, along with my other shows, are part of the Flightcast podcast network, if you will. There's the main show, the Flightcast, where I talk about movies, TV, and other sort of media all the time. There's Flight Chat, which is the feedback show where people send in emails. We have quite a few loyal listeners over the last couple of years that send in emails. We're going to do an episode of that this Friday, finally, and get through some more of their emails just recently that they sent in. There's Flight Review that I mentioned before for movie reviews. The last one that I did of that was for Captain America Brave New World. I gave my thoughts on that a couple of weeks ago. And every once in a while, when a big piece of quote-unquote emergency news happens, I will do a show called Flight Alert to talk about that. What was the last time? I think there was the Superman trailer? Was that the last time I did a Flight Alert episode? I think so, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, the Superman teaser trailer, that's right, back in December. But at any rate, all of those shows can be found at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcast. That includes Apple Podcasts, that includes YouTube at the Flightcast YouTube channel, and it also includes Spotify and Pandora if you listen to your podcasts on any of those platforms, or if you use the Overcast app or anywhere else that you get your podcast, you can find the Flightcast and all of my other subsequent shows attached to it. And of course, want to take a moment to thank all of the loyal patrons and supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. Thank you to those of you new subscribers who may or may not have just joined and become a flight officer to listen to the bonus content. I did record an episode of Flight Speed yesterday on my way home from work, where I asked a very critical question about the future of social media for the Flightcast with respect to a decision that I'm probably going to make, but just wanted to get some input from our most loyal of patrons and our most loyal of audiences, if you will. It might be something else that comes up on Flight Chat if anybody that is a member decides to respond in kind that way. So we might end up talking about that on Friday. But either way, I'm sure it'll be a subject going forward with respect to social media at the moment that we will get into. But thank you so much to those of you loyal patrons, loyal supporters at patreon.com/theflightcast. Thank you so much for your support. All right, let's get into it. We're 3 episodes into season 1 of Daredevil Born Again. And, let me just start off by saying this with respect to the show, because I wasn't sure that this was a show I was going to keep up with every week. But let me start out by saying that this is a show that I legitimately, a couple of years ago, did not expect to exist. Because I really hadn't gotten any indication personally from Marvel Studios that they were going to even remotely continue, let alone connect anything from the current MCU incarnation back to Marvel Netflix. And we talked for years, this goes back to the days of Fans Without Borders. Myself and Brent talked about this all the time. We were huge fans of Marvel Netflix. We reviewed just about every damn show on Marvel Netflix. We reviewed the first 3 seasons of Daredevil. We reviewed Punisher. We reviewed Jessica Jones. We reviewed Iron Fist, The Defenders, all that, right? We loved all of it. It was outstanding. It was fantastic. Luke Cage, of course, 2 seasons of that. Can't forget that show. And as time went on, like, I don't even totally remember exactly where the consternation came from, what the direction was. Anthony, you might remember if you're listening. But the sticking point, as far as they're never going to connect Marvel Netflix, it's never going to be this, it's never going to be that, it's never going to be copacetic. And to be fair, one of my sticking points with respect to connectivity between Marvel Netflix and the Marvel Cinematic Universe was I needed the movies to reference the shows at all, because the shows would reference the movies all the time. And I don't know that we really got that until what? Spider-Man No Way Home, when Matt showed up in that scene, right? And that's the big thing. I saw a Reddit post that thanked. They said it was thanking Spider-Man and Hawkeye for the existence of Daredevil Born Again, because obviously, Hawkeye's connection to, when he was Ronin, connection to Kingpin and all that, which I need to finish that show. Can you believe I watched Hawkeye and like got all the way up to the final episode, did not watch the final episode? Weird, huh? And I own that show now. I bought the Steelbook. I totally have it. I should totally go back and rewatch it, like in the middle of this Daredevil Born Again thing. There's a lot of Marvel shows that need to get caught up on, to be honest with you. But at any rate, this post was thanking Ronin and Spider-Man for Daredevil Born Again, because Ronin obviously brought in Kingpin, right? Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin. And of course, Spider-Man No Way Home brought back Charlie Cox's Matt Murdock. And all the pieces seem to come together from there, right? We hear that they're going to do this show. We hear that those two are coming back. We hear that they're bringing back Deborah Ann Woll to be Karen Page. We hear that they're bringing back Eldon Henson to be Foggy Nelson. It's like, wow, okay, this is actually happening. All right, well, you know what? I can reconcile that, and I can say, well, fine. Marvel Netflix lives again. But here was the true question. The true question going into this series was, all right, how much of this is really going to feel like Marvel Netflix? Like, how much is this going to feel like that original 3 seasons of Daredevil that we saw? Because I haven't seen She-Hulk. She-Hulk is one of the shows that I need to get caught up on with respect to the MCU shows. At MCU TV, I have not seen She-Hulk. I have not seen Loki Season 2. I have not seen Echo. And like I just mentioned, I didn't finish Hawkeye, right? I think that's it. Oh, and What If. What If is another big one, like as far as my Marvel television show catch-up. I've seen, I think, every other Marvel show except all of those, right? But I bring this up to say that I didn't see Daredevil's, like I heard about it and I saw screen caps. I saw what the costume looked like. I know Daredevil. I know Matt Murdock is in She-Hulk. And I know it's a different tone, if you will, because that show is a different tone. But either way, the question for me was, all right, how much is this going to feel like the Marvel Netflix Daredevil that we all came to know and love for those 3 seasons way back when? And I can tell you that 3 episodes in, high-level thoughts so far with respect to this show, Daredevil Born Again very much feels like Marvel Netflix Daredevil Season 4. It absolutely does, no doubt about it. And yeah, there's been a passage of time, right? Obviously some years, but the show picks up where they left off, right? They had their own law firm. They were working together in New York. Everything was all hunky-dory and copacetic. They looked like they were in an even better place than they were at the end of Season 3 of Daredevil. But the through line was there, right? So this idea basically is that, all right, without directly yelling it, Marvel Netflix most certainly happened, most certainly existed. All of that took place alongside what was happening in the MCU, and it is being further acknowledged here in this show as we continue on the through line in that regard. But I've seen some people critical of this show because they haven't made any big moves or any major mentions of the bigger movies, anything that has happened in the previous phases, or even phases 4 and 5 and phase 5 that we're in right now in the MCU. And from what I understand, these 9 episodes that we're going to get in this first season of Born Again are going to take place. They will be considered phase 5, whereas the second season, which will premiere next year, is going to be considered phase 6, if I'm not mistaken, of the MCU. I think that was what I read in the wiki. I could, if I'm wrong, definitely correct me on that one, Jared, Anthony, anybody else that is watching this show. But I tell you, when it comes to MCU TV, a tone and a tenor, and a lot of it doesn't necessarily match what we felt with Marvel Netflix, certainly not with Daredevil. So the question was, would this show be back on that level? And I think it is. I really do. I think it is. This show very much feels like what we had with Marvel Netflix Daredevil, without question, to be honest with you. And I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that there is an understanding of what the tone of that show was and how the characters are portrayed and how things went and what New York is like. And they've done their best to carry it over so far through these first 3 episodes. They really have, in my personal opinion. Subjectively speaking, of course, it is all subjective. But that was my biggest fear, if you will, right? And look, you know how I feel about that. Like, whatever Marvel Studios decided to do, whatever tone and tenor they decided to take with Matt Murdock, with these characters, I was open to, right? It wasn't like I was saying, well, it must be exactly like this. It must be exactly. No, I'm not saying that at all. You're bringing back these actors. Odds are you're trying to make some connections. You're trying to do something that is in the same vein of what they already built in those 3 seasons. And I've mentioned this before, like, people talk about, I remember some years ago, we talked about Margot Robbie playing Harley Quinn in The Suicide Squad with James Gunn. And one of the things I said, when people were concerned about whether or not her characterization would change drastically, one of the things that I said was, listen, you can't you can't memory wipe or neuralize Men in Black style the work that Margot Robbie did to build her version of Harley Quinn on screen from David Ayer's Suicide Squad and also from Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, which means that all of that is going to go into her performance. So we will absolutely see something that is born out of that in the Suicide Squad, which I believe we did. I most certainly believe we did, and I thoroughly enjoy that film. So I think it's the same thing here, right? Charlie Cox knows how he's playing Matt Murdock. Vincent D'Onofrio knows how he's playing Kingpin, right? Like, everybody here, this felt like a homecoming. So far, this really has felt like a homecoming, and it's been brutal and shocking at times, which again feels like a homecoming with respect to a Daredevil, Marvel Studios Daredevil in that regard, right? But it just, all of our old buddies back from the original Daredevil show are back. All the old feelings, the old tone, the old setup, right? I mean, it feels like we are at home. It feels like Marvel Netflix is back on track or back in play, if you will. Maybe not on track. It wasn't that it was off track or anything like that. But it was just nice to see. It's nice to see this going on again, because that really was, I mean, that Marvel, Daredevil, and really what they built with the Marvel Netflix shows, that was a nice little pocket. That was a really nice pocket of like MCU like goodness, if you will. For a time, I felt like the tone of the shows, especially Daredevil, definitely was more serious and a bit grittier, actually a lot grittier than the movies were, right? And even found fans in the past that, didn't necessarily like all of the goofiness and the quippy stuff within the movies, that would definitely gravitate toward a show like Daredevil. And this is definitely picking up where that left off. The only person missing at this point is Claire, the night nurse, right? And if she shows up, which I don't know if there's any plans for that, I don't really read Scooper Madness or any other insider reports on stuff like this, so I try to stay away from spoilers in that regard. So I don't know if there's any plans for that to happen, but everything else just felt right at home with the way they started this show. And I mean, even going down to like, okay, Wilson Bethel back in the pilot episode as Bullseye, brutally. And I mean, they gave us a one-shot fight, which reminiscent of, there was the classic hallway one in the first season of Daredevil. There was the prison one, which was that season 3, I think. Season 3 of Daredevil, I think, was where we saw that one. But yeah, I mean, just all of the old feelings and all of the old tones and all of the old characterizations just came all rushing back in this show, and it's great. It's great so far. Really, really enjoy this show. To get into the nitty gritty of it with respect to spoilers, I am very curious as to where this show is going and to what this show is doing, because we've got a number of different dynamics going on here. And, this is the point in the episode where I definitely have to not necessarily warn, but make it abundantly clear that, even though I've said time and time again on the main show and certainly on Patreon that I don't do political podcasts. I'm not a political person in that regard, where it's like I talk about politics here and there, but I also don't shy away from politics. And I find it interesting and somewhat hilarious that people nowadays, especially in our circles, try to say, well, I'm apolitical. I don't follow all of that shit, whatever, and all this. And it's like, well, but you consume media that absolutely has a commentary on it, that absolutely speaks to the real world that we live in, right? And I guess there are times where it's acceptable, like now in this show and in other shows, and times where it isn't acceptable, like Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Yeah, I am still a little like, you know, it wasn't okay with Batman and Superman, but it's totally okay for Daredevil. It's totally okay for some of these other Marvel characters. Okay, whatever. It is what it is. I guess that's where the subjective nature of the opinion comes into play. But let's be clear here. There are a lot of themes and there are a lot of subplots and subtexts going on in Daredevil Born Again. And man, so much of it is aimed squarely at the world we live in. My goodness. I mean, come on. Let's just be clear here, okay? And mind you, I know that we people have gone through this conversation with the last season of The Boys. No, I am not caught up. I have not watched. I didn't finish season 3 of The Boys. I have not seen season 4 of The Boys, and I have not watched Gen V, okay? But I know that when season 4 of The Boys was released, there was this big whole consternation because finally the conservatives and finally the GOP and the MAGA boys discovered, oh my goodness, this show is making fun of us, right? Wasn't that a huge revelation? I have no idea what happened. I'm still very much in the bubble with respect to that show, and I'm going to remain that way until I finally get caught up on it. But it did look like the reaction was they finally have caught on to what the show has been saying all that time, because I saw that messaging. The writing was on the wall in the first 3 seasons, everything that I've seen in it. And I mean, here, it's no different. Come on, we've got a plot line where Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, is running for mayor. And the way he's running for mayor is 1000% indicative of the current president of the United States. They even had, come on, if it wasn't any more obvious what the allegory was, they got blue and yellow hats literally saying, Fisk will fix it. Okay? Campaign hats. They're not red with white letters. They're blue with yellow letters. Come on now. Come on. Seriously. I mean, some of it, I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that Stu, I don't know if you're watching the show, but maybe you think that's a little obvious, a little on the nose, right? Well, you know what? I feel like a lot of people still don't get it. I feel like, and Anthony was saying that too. We were talking about this on Blue Sky the other day. He said, yeah, no, it's still too subtle for them. They're still not going to catch it. And you know what? That's probably true. They still don't understand exactly what the allegory is, but it's as clear as day. Seriously. And that's kind of like the overt part of it, right? Like, that's kind of the obvious part of it. But there's some other seedier shit going on with respect to this show. And I mean, we go back to the first episode, and I mean, they drop a hammer on us immediately by taking out Foggy. And it's like, oh my goodness. But I am firmly in the he's not dead camp. I am, and yes, maybe I have done a little bit of poking, not in terms of like any insider information in the shows, but I have found out that apparently that did happen in the comics. There is a plot line that happened in the comics where they faked his heartbeat. They faked his death, and they took his heartbeat off the board so that Matt couldn't hear it. And Matt actually did believe that he was dead, but he was put in WITSEC or something, right? Like witness protection against his will or something to that effect, and he was actually alive. Yeah, count me in on that. Because here's the thing. You don't bring back Eldon Henson for one episode. You just don't. I understand that, it's a very elaborate bait and switch. Okay, fine. I get it. But I'm sorry. With as much as he was involved in the previous series, no, I don't think that you just bring him back for, whatever, like for a little cameo to kill him off and to push Karen out of the way as well for Matt to go on by himself. Because I think what's happening here, the story that they're telling is they're putting Matt in a crossroads. Matt really is struggling with the idea of suppressing Daredevil, right? The monster that comes out, the beast within, if you will. He is completely resigned to the idea that he's just going to be Matt Murdock, mild-mannered lawyer. Maybe not so mild-mannered, but definitely not the devil, right? He's not going to be the devil of Hell's Kitchen. He's not putting that costume back on. Not after Foggy died, right? Like, he's taking that to heart. And it's been a year. It's been some years, separating this season of the show from season 3 of Marvel Netflix Daredevil. And it's also been another year since Foggy's death in the pilot of this particular show. And he is really doing all that he can to suppress the devil. He does not want that persona to come out. He is really just trying to be Matt Murdock, lawyer, in that regard. And we see him struggle mightily with this like from a mental standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, and also at one point from a physical standpoint in the tail end, the very end of episode 2 of this show. But he is trying his damnedest to keep that bottled up, right? And he's struggling. He really is. But this idea of wanting to be a hero without putting a mask on is a theme that continues to run throughout so far the first 3 episodes of this show. And it speaks to a bigger question, and we're not going all Sokovia Accords with this because we're keeping this localized to New York and Hell's Kitchen and whatnot. But the idea of, vigilantes and of course Kingpin, of course Fisk is anti-vigilante. There's no doubt about it. And that's part of his platform that he runs on, the idea that vigilantes are, without justice. There's a tense conversation that he has. And again, this just felt like home. It really did. To see Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio together again as Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk, just, oh, it was so good. The tension, you could cut it with a knife, and it was just really well done. I love the way that they shot it. I love the way that they acted it. Again, these are veterans that are building upon the work that they did in those first 3 seasons of Daredevil over on Netflix. They know these characters. They know the way that they've played these characters. They inhabit these characters. They are these characters. We know Charlie Cox as Daredevil now. We know him as Matt Murdock, right? And really, even though Vincent D'Onofrio is very much a chameleon and has been in a number of things, we now know him as Kingpin. He is Wilson Fisk to us, honestly. And to see them together again, outstanding. Loved it, loved it, loved it. I mean, really, it just really felt like a homecoming. I can't say this isn't Daredevil Homecoming, but Born Again, like there is something to be said for that subtitle, Born Again, in that the devil and all these characters that we loved from Marvel Netflix have risen again and are back again to tell us another story, to continue on their story in the MCU proper, as it were, and also pay tribute and justice to the prior work that they did. It's really good. It is really good. And you know what? I'll go ahead and say this. I'm really not interested in terms of all the changes that were made. I know that originally this was going to be a different show that, Dario Scardapane and others were making, and that they had made some changes. I don't care about all that. I really don't, truthfully. I mean, we can talk about that at some point later, but truthfully, I am just more interested in what they present. And I would say this more often than not, with the exception of, obviously something like the Snyder Cut is an exception where, like, that was artwork that was done, and there was an extremely unique set of circumstances that just screwed that over. This is not a case of that. This is a case of they made changes before they released it, and now we're seeing the art form as they actually intended it to be, like, after changes, right? This isn't like a similar situation to that in that regard. Nobody got screwed over. It's like, okay, no, we're actively collaborating to do this and make this with the show. So I'm more, I would like to evaluate this show based on that. And the dynamic that they've got with Matt, where they really are like twisting him in knots in terms of him suppressing the Daredevil personality. I mean, we really have not seen him in the costume more than that, in that pilot episode. That is it, right? The idea is that he is not putting it on. He is not going to be the devil. Now, we know at some point that's going to happen. We know at some point that costume's come back out, but he's doing everything he can not to have it come out. And in many ways, it's putting him in some real tough situations, not only introspectively, but also with respect to his relations to other characters. And we've got some new characters, right? I mentioned all of the oldies but goodies that came back. I also want to mention, before getting to some new characters, I want to mention that Eilert Zurer is back as Vanessa. That is also awesome. And I really dig this dynamic where there is tension between her and Kingpin. I like that. I like that a lot, because this whole idea of Wilson, I don't know what Fisk's game is, right? Is he trying to be legitimate? Is he really trying to do the whole Trump thing, at least on the surface? Or is there you just get the sense that there's something underlying going on, whatever it is. But he keeps acting, at least on screen, on the surface, like he's trying to play it, above the line in that regard. But Vanessa is still very much involved below the line, because remember, she got involved. She became part of the business. And when this show starts, she is definitely, like, in charge of the business. She is running that meeting. She is talking to those crime bosses. She is ruling the roost as far as Kingpin's operation is concerned, while he was away rehabbing, doing what he did after what happened to him. at the end of Daredevil season 3. Understandable for sure, right? And so there is tension. There's absolutely tension because he doesn't want any part of that. He's pushing that aside. He's got this new agenda in terms of becoming the mayor of New York, and he is shutting her out, and she doesn't understand why. And she's holding together the business, and it seems like she really wants credit for that. So she's distancing herself from this plan, whatever it is that he's got cooked up. And there's a lot of stuff going on here in terms of emotional dynamics, psychological dynamics within their relationship alone. And this is where, I've talked before about the dangers of recasting a role, right? And when you have characters that you have gotten to know over a period of time, and if there's any type of gap, I mean, this really is a unique situation where, okay, the last season of Daredevil that we got was 2018, right? So we're talking not just, 7 years ago, but pre-pandemic, right? That's the last time that we got it, right? And the idea that that these characters are gonna pick up where they left off 7 years later, I mean, a lot of things can go wrong with respect to, well, we couldn't get that actor back, we couldn't get this actor back. And we've seen some situations like this happen in the comic book medium, right? Some of the two most famous ones, obviously the recasting of Colonel Rhodes, going from Terrence Howard in the first Iron Man film to Don Cheadle in the entire rest of the MCU, right? Up to this point, up to the present in that regard, right? And that was a case where Marvel kind of caught it early, and we didn't build enough of a relationship, you would think, as an audience with Terrence Howard's version, so that we had to like divorce ourselves of that and really get into Don Cheadle's version. No, we've had Don Cheadle for the vast majority of it, and I think that really did help them out. It's more difficult in the other example, which is the character of Rachel Dawes in the Dark Knight trilogy, switching from Katie Holmes in Batman Begins to Maggie Gyllenhaal in the Dark Knight, and that's because what they did with her character in the sequel, we're meant to have an emotional impact to what happens to that character that we don't really have because we're dealing with a different actress. And the connection that you made with the first version of the character that Katie Holmes played in Batman Begins is gone. It's lost, right? And it's really not their fault. It's not necessarily the movie's fault. It's just through whatever circumstances they couldn't get Katie Holmes back, and so you lose that connection. You lose that emotional connection that you established with the character of Rachel Dawes in the first film, and so what happens to the character in the second film does not hit as hard, does not impact as emotionally as maybe it was intended to in that regard, right? We have avoided that here. We most certainly have, because when we saw Foggy get shot, it was Eldon Henson. It was absolutely the Eldon Henson. It was the Foggy that we came to know and love from Marvel Netflix, right? When we saw Karen react, it was Deborah Ann Woll. Okay, it's Charlie Cox. It's all of our old friends, if you will, and that connection is important. So when we have the counseling sessions, right, the marriage counseling sessions between Fisk and Vanessa, the fact that it is still D'Onofrio and Islet Zur there, like, yes, it works. It works, and all of the emotions and all of that carryover that we had, those of us that are loyal fans of Marvel Netflix from back in the day, we can bring that over. We don't have to get rid of it. We don't have to start anew. We can pick up where we left off as an audience, and that's really gratifying, in my opinion. I cannot reinforce how awesome that is, and they were able to get everybody back to continue this. Awesome, awesome job in that regard, and I think that it really is going to serve this show well going forward with respect to those emotional connections. Now, with that in mind, we got some new cast members. We most certainly do. I've mentioned just about all the important ones that, have come over from the old show. But as far as new characters, let's see, where do we begin? Okay, how about this? Margarita Lavivia, or I hope I pronounced that right. She's Heather Glenn. She is a therapist. And the crazy part about this is, so it's a setup because Matt's partner, who I'll go ahead and bring her up, Nikki M. James, she plays Kirsten McDuffie, a former New York assistant district attorney, and she is Matt's new partner. Like, obviously, after Foggy died, he started a new practice. It's Murdoch and McDuffie, right? And so Kirsten totally sets him up with Heather, and, it just puts them in each other's path, unknowingly and unwittingly. And yes, they are a love interest. It's give and take. It's like it's touch and go, I guess is a better way to put it, with respect to Matt, because even if you're, through the TV series, and certainly if you even go back to the 2003 Ben Affleck film, and go back to watch the director's cut. The director's cut is better. The extended cut of that film is better. Either way, Matt is not someone that does well with the opposite sex in terms of relationships in that regard. And so you see him struggle a little bit here, but there's definitely something between him and Heather. And then you find out she's Wilson Fisk's and Vanessa's marriage counselor. And it's like, oh, okay, Matt doesn't know about this, or maybe he does, I don't know. But oh, that's awesome. That is great. So you've made her a therapist, which means she's already going to be probing into the psyche of what Matt's doing, and now she's also probing into the psyche of what the Fisk and Vanessa are doing as a couple. So there's a lot of like psychological tension that is built up there in terms of her playing in these two worlds, and she doesn't realize how much these two worlds intersect whatsoever. And it's going to be very intriguing to see if she does find that, if she does find that out in that regard. It's fantastic, to be honest with you. So I like that. I like her character. I also do like Nikki M. James playing Kirsten McDuffie. I do like that because she's the character that's like, you got to have the DA, you got to have somebody that is rooted in, okay, this is the law, this is what we're doing. Somebody that is connected to what Matt does without being a vigilante, without knowing about him being Daredevil in that regard, right? Like he is he's got his toe in both worlds, right? Whether he wants to shun and suppress the superhero world or not. But she is the lawyer. She's the one that's like, okay, no, you're here, you're at the law practice, this is what we're going to do, right? And she doesn't always agree with what he does. Like this whole thing with Hector Ayala, which definitely want to talk about him because his whole arc in these first couple of episodes, very intriguing. Now, I will say that, she didn't agree with Matt's, just to wrap that up, she didn't agree with Matt's perspective in terms of taking Hector Ayala's case. But I will fully admit, I don't know much at all about Hector Ayala, aka White Tiger. I don't. I really don't. This actor, I've seen this actor before, Camar de los Reyes. What have I seen him in? Well, let's go to his wiki real quick. Let's see. ER? No. New York Undercover? Maybe. I did watch that show way back in the day on Fox, so that's possible. Oh, he's been in, what, daytime Emmys? Okay, so he's been in some soap operas. Law and Order, Wheel of Fortune. Okay, Wheel of Fortune. Was he a contestant? Oh, he was a celebrity contestant. Okay, what could he have been in that I would have said? Blue Bloods? No. Castle? No. MacGyver, like the reboot MacGyver. Is that the CBS one, right? The Rookie, All American. He's been in a decent amount of stuff, right? But he's definitely a character. He's definitely an actor that I am familiar with in that regard. So, but I don't know a whole lot about the Hector Ayala character. I don't know a whole lot about White Tiger. Obviously, a vigilante that is powered by a mystical amulet that imbues him with powers that apparently do not include being bulletproof. I'll get to that in terms of the end of episode 3. But yeah, that whole arc, that was really like a subset of what Matt is going through with respect to the psychological ramifications of him shedding the superhero personality. Because Hector is basically like a foil. Hector is a representation of Matt's battle, right? This is a family man. He has the family that Matt doesn't have, right? He's got a wife, he's got kids, and they're struggling. They're working class Puerto Ricans. They're struggling in New York, but he still has this calling. He still feels the need to go out and do good, save people, help the police, do whatever, right? And when he gets when he gets called out on the carpet, when he gets essentially framed for the murder of a policeman in that subway, like, this is Matt. There's a part of Matt's psyche that can't let this go. He can't just push this aside because, and it's more than just the idea of, okay, this guy's a vigilante, which he doesn't learn, I think, until later. But I think there was kind of like a sixth sense almost where it's like, okay, now I got to help this guy. Not only because it's something that he does in terms of the types of like clients that he helps, but also in the sense of this guy being an actual hero and doing the right thing, knowing like, okay, no, I know he's telling the truth, and I know that the police are trying to railroad him, so we got to help him in that regard. And of course, McDuffie doesn't want to do it. McDuffie is like, no, this is an open and shut case. The cops are going to crucify us. Why are we doing this? Why are we trying to pick a fight and start a war against the New York Police Department? This is not a good idea. And this is all fresh on the heels of Kingpin getting elected mayor, right? Which back to that for a second. We're going all over the place here, but it's okay. It's a general discussion of episodes 1 through 3 of this show. Kingpin getting elected. Seriously, the real life parallels. I mentioned the Fisk will fix it earlier, but just the way that all happened, right? He's got no political experience. He's not really tied to any of the campaigns, and he just comes in as a wild card. He's got what's her name? What is her name? Oh, Sabrina Guevara. Sabrina Guevara, who plays Sheila Rivera, his campaign director. Now, you've seen her. You know you've seen her in other things, right? She was in X-Men Days of Future Past, right? She's been in, what was the show? She was in Burn Notice. That's right. She was in a couple of episodes of Burn Notice. She's been in Law & Order Special Victims Unit. She's been in a number of other things. She's definitely a who's who. She's been in The Handmaid's Tale. She's been in the Chicago shows. She's been in a lot of stuff. She's no stranger to any of this type of world in television and in terms of any of the comic book stuff or whatnot. But her whole thing, right? Like the idea that she's not really, this is a dark horse campaign, right? The idea that, okay, no, he's not going to supplant any of the other time tested candidates, but the campaign that they wage on social media deliberately mimics the campaign of the current president of the United States, not just in this past election, but also going back to 2016. Don't tell me that wasn't done on purpose. It 1000% was done on purpose. This is art imitating life. And again, it's okay to do this apparently in Daredevil, but it's not okay to do it in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Whatever. Yes, I might be, holding on to that a little bit. Whatever. I don't give a shit. It is what it is. It's how I feel. But it was so obvious the way that he just sprung into that award. And I'll tell you, one of my favorite parts of this show, truthfully, is BB. And what BB is doing, BB Urich, who does the BB report, she's Ben Urich's niece. I'm like, okay, no, clearly she's connected to Ben. She's either a daughter or she's, some other cousin, whatever. It turns out niece. Ben was her uncle. Okay, Ben Urich, of course, who was played by Vondi Curtis Hall, who was killed. The character itself was killed in the first season of Daredevil, indeed. Which, of course, that's a little grisly, when Wilson tells her, I knew him, he was a good journalist. It's like, oh, okay, you asshole. Whatever. But those are the memories. That's the connection that we have to the prior show that we can bring into this, right? Something that we know that BB does not know about just how horrible Wilson actually is in this regard, right? But the BB report stuff is awesome because that's the man on the street stuff, where you're seeing all the people of New York, right? The salt of the earth, the working class, giving their honest opinions. And it is indicative of what we see now on Instagram and on TikTok and in the social media world. This is literally how journalism is conducted nowadays in the field, like on street corners and on sidewalks, right? And the honest reactions that we get from people with respect to this are phenomenal. And again, mirroring real life as far as what these people are saying, how they're acting, how they were supporting Fisk, the type of energy that they were bringing, and on the whole Fisk will fix it thing. I mean, seriously, how is this not a direct allegory for MAGA? Absolutely it is. There's no doubt about it. And there's no question that it was done on purpose. And this is where I commend the comic book genre, the comic book movie and television genre, because when they do this right, when they really hit home with this and don't necessarily make it after school special, and I'm sure there are some people that will think this is still heavy handed the way that they're doing it, but I don't consider this like Supergirl or, any of the CW stuff that wasn't Black Panther, or not Black Panther, Black Lightning, pardon me. I think this is actually closer to what Black Lightning does because, I mean, it's in New York and it's in the Marvel universe, but they're not name dropping Trump. They're not name dropping MAGA or anything like that. They're just building their own pocket of it, and they're basically making Kingpin Trump. Okay, and they're basically making the whole Fisk will fix it group that is the Marvel version of MAGA, and it goes darker. And they haven't flat out said this, but they have teased exactly where and how this and why this is going darker and what the inspiration for this is. I'll get to that in just a bit here. But when these shows and these movies do that, when they create their own allegories to speak on what is going on in the real world and in our lives and in society now that we are dealing with, it's poetic. And it's when it's done this well and when it's this clever and when it's put together in this way where it's like, okay, you know what? How could we not believe this? How is this not relatable? How is this not believable? It's happening on the news every damn day. We see it all the time. And there are plenty of people out there that are like, this is not what I watch when I want to turn on a TV show or when I want to turn on a movie. I just want to turn my brain off and disconnect from the real world. Yeah, I suppose you could do that. Or you could watch a piece of storytelling that actually does give you some introspective thought and perspective on what is happening in the real world. And I firmly believe that this show is carrying that torch and continuing that on. And let's be clear, the first 3 seasons of the show did that as well. No doubt about it. So to me, that I applaud this. So far, the writing for this show, fantastic. Absolutely outstanding. I love what they're doing with that. It's really well done. And the whole Hector Ayala thing, you know, the twist, and this is where where Matt gets twisted in knots with respect to this. Because first, when he discovers that Hector is White Tiger, he's all over the judge and the prosecutor not to do anything with it. No, you can't do this. Leave it alone. This will prejudice my client. Da 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 da. Right? And that lawyer, the prosecutor, he's the dude who was the straight laced, like the bureaucrat. That's what I was looking for. The bureaucrat from Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. Was it Revenge of the Fallen? Yeah, the second Transformers movie. Not Dark Side of the Moon, Revenge of the Fallen. Yes, he's that guy, and he's been in a bunch of other shit too. He looks like Bradley Whitford, but he isn't. Right? That type of thing. And I don't know why I can't find his name. Like, I'm looking through the castings here, and I just cannot see his name listed anywhere here in the castings. I don't know why. I gotta look. I gotta look this up real quick. Hang on. Let me see who the hell this guy is. John Benjamin Hickey, that's his name. Okay, he plays Benjamin Hochberg, who is like the DA, and he's a real asshole, no doubt about it. I just the way he was talking to the jury and the condescension and all that, it was just like, okay, we see where you're going with this. We see what type of archetype you're playing. Okay, fine, whatever. I guess maybe he goes in a different path. Maybe he's probably got some connection in the comics that I'm also unaware of. Whatever, it is what it is. But the whole thing with respect to Matt trying to get the whole White Tiger thing thrown out. And then after the witness, the guy that Hector was trying to save from the crooked cops in the subway before one of them got hit by the train, that Hector's being framed for his murder, right? Like, when that guy just totally freezes. And you know what? I really appreciated how they did this in the third episode. The trial happens, and the idea is like, okay, they've stashed the informant, this Torres kid, this Torres guy. They're like, okay, but the dirty cops are not, Matt even hears one of them go, Torres cannot testify. And it's like, okay, well, they're going to try and off him. They're going to try and take him out, right? And mind you, this is after Matt has already beaten the shit out of those two cops. Now, let's just focus on that for a second. Let's just talk about how the end of episode 2 was, right? So they find Torres, right? Because Cherry, the old cop, the one that retired in the pilot episode, in the very first episode, and he discovered, after Matt threw Bullseye off the roof, and it's like, oh, well, Bullseye's dead. No, he's not dead. He lived, and he's in prison now. Okay. But Cherry finds out who he is, finds out that he was Daredevil. And I like the actor who plays Cherry. I swear I've seen this guy before, too. What is his name? Clark Johnson. What else has he been in? Let's look him up. Because he's definitely one of those guys. He's been in a ton of stuff. Wait, you know what? Was he in Drop Zone? Yes, he was. Okay. So go back to the 90s, right? Remember the Wesley Snipes action movies? There was the one called Drop Zone where he is like this. He's a U.S. Marshal and he's going after skydivers that killed his brother, played by Malcolm Jamal Warner. Yes, this dude that plays Cherry was an FBI agent for like 2 seconds in that movie. It is insane that I remember that. But he's been in a ton of other stuff. He was in the SWAT movie in 2003. He was in Iron Eagle. He's been in a ton of TV, Law and Order, The Shield, The Wire, all that stuff. Yeah, no, this is definitely that guy. And I like his role because basically what he is now is he's kind of like Ben Urich, but he's a cop, right? Like, he'll help Matt. He's like the boots on the ground, like, retired cop. And I guess he hasn't, maybe he hasn't fully retired. He's still got a badge or whatever, but like, he is the one helping Matt on the ground, with respect to his operations and doing stuff, not necessarily off the cuff, but he's the one that goes and finds Torres and stashes him in a safe house, right? So the idea is, okay, they found him, and it was a case where when the cops, the dirty cops, figured it out where he was, they go to basically take him out. And I love the way Matt played this. And again, this just speaks to how Matt is getting tossed, like he's being twisted in knots with respect to his psyche. He finds Torres. He tells Torres to leave the apartment as the dirty cops are banging on the door. And then after Torres leaves, Matt doesn't sneak out with him. He just unlocks the door, right? He unlocks the door, lets the dirty cops comes in, tells them, oh no, sorry, the confidential informant that you were coming to take out isn't here anymore. And as the cops try to rough this blind lawyer up, Matt does what he can to try and suppress him. He's like, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. And nope, they pushed it too far. And look, I swear to you, these guys should be dead. Seriously, come on. Go back and watch. Anybody that saw that, these guys should 1000% be absolutely dead as doornails. Those were kill shots that Matt was taking in that fight, right? You know what it reminded me of? Anybody play Batman Arkham Asylum? I know you have. Remember how when Batman would counter he would counter a move from a thug, right? But the counter and like the ensuing takedown move would be really violent. Like he would pile drive a guy's head into a concrete floor, and then when you put on detective vision, it would say he was unconscious. Yeah, okay, no, that person has a broken neck, a shattered spine. That person's dead. In real life, that person is dead. That's what Matt did to those cops. And seriously, the way that it ended with that primal scream, I spent the whole week thinking, oh, well, let's see how they're going to play this. Are the cops actually going to be dead? Or is there going to be something else going on? Well, as it turns out, no, the cops lived. I guess, in true MCU fashion, that won't kill you. That's not guaranteed to kill you. And not only that, the violence that Matt threw on them and on the both of them, I mean, he took them out in like less than 2 minutes with some really violent shit, like normal violent Daredevil shit like he's used to doing when he's got the mask on. The devil came out. The devil from Hell's Kitchen absolutely came out in this fight, right? This blind dude taking out these two dirty cops. But seriously, when we see the one dirty cop in episode 3 at the trial, all he's got is like some bruises around his eyes. No, he should be like neck brace, wheelchair. He should be able to walk straight after what Matt did to him and his buddy. They lived. Not only did they live, but they lived enough that they could walk under their own power into a flippin' courtroom and testify against Hector Ayala. Okay, it's the MCU. It's the MCU. I will suspend that disbelief. I'm sure at least one of you had an issue with it. If so, we can talk about it on Flight Chat. But for me, all right, it's MCU. It is what it is. It's more delicious that way because I was concerned that, well, okay, now it's a case where Matt's got his own, rap that he's got to beat. No, it's a case where these cops got the shit kicked out of them by a blind lawyer, and they don't know he's Daredevil. They just know he's a blind lawyer that can kick their ass. So when the one approached him in the bathroom, that was a funny tete-a-tete where he was like, oh, I'm sure they'd like to know that you're a fighter. Oh, I'm sure they'd like to know that you were tampering with a witness. And Matt basically giving him the look like, I will kick your ass again. Seriously. I will give you more than bruised eyes at this point. Get out of my way. I am leaving this bathroom. That was great. That was awesome. And I was happy they decided to go that particular route with it. That was cool. But yeah, like that whole scenario and here let's get into it. Let's get into this other, nefarious part of this, right? Because like, Matt is going through this whole trial with Hector Ayala, and he's told the lawyers, he's impressed upon the judge, dismiss the white tiger stuff. We can't use that. Okay, fine. All right, good. But then when Torres gets to testify, it's like the pressure of the dirty cops gets to him, and he lies. He lies on the stand and completely torpedoes their whole case and doesn't make him or McDuffie look good. And so that's at the point where Matt's like, in their meeting is like, we got to put Hector on the stand, and hopefully the jury will see the truth of who he is as we see him, right? But Matt has a nuclear weapon, like metaphorically speaking, in his bag. Because what does he do? In the middle of questioning Hector, he pulls out the white tiger mask. And McDuffie warns him, Matt, don't do this. Like she says out loud, Matt, don't do this. He doesn't listen. He pulls out the mask and is like, are you the white tiger? He outed this dude in the middle of a flippin' New York court. And of course, the judge is pissed because he pulls him into chambers. Is like, you literally told me not to accept this, and now you pull it out now when you need it after your confidential informant witness blew up your entire case. And of course, Hochberg is pissed. He's like, whatever. And he made that little veiled threat, like all the DAs, everybody, all the assistants I know, they're going to be up your ass for the rest of your life, whatever. Whatever. Matt is not even remotely afraid. But I'm sitting there the whole time like, what is his play here? What is he doing with this? And I like the conversation that he had with Hector afterwards, where Hector was like, you should have asked me to do that. That wasn't your secret to tell. Because he's right. That wasn't his secret to tell. Matt outed him and his superhero identity, outed his vigilante identity in a way that he wouldn't have appreciated, right? And it is very hypocritical. It's really hypocritical of Matt to do that, right? The idea that he had, remember, go back to the Defenders. It's always struck me as weird that out of the 4 Defenders, he was the only one wearing a mask. He was the only one wearing a costume. He was the only one who had an identity to hide, because Luke didn't hide his identity, neither did Jessica, and neither did Finn, as far as the Iron Fist. Or not Finn, pardon me, Danny Rand. Finn Jones was the actor who played Danny Rand. I got the names mixed up. But none of them hid their identities. Matt was the only one hiding his identity. He's the only one that finds it important to hide an identity. So what does he do at the first chance he gets to that he feels like he's going to lose the case? Let me out Hector. Let me throw his life on the line in that regard and put this out there. And granted, strategically it worked. Strategically, it absolutely helped him out in terms of building this public case. You know, that all these people that White Tiger rescued, like the guy and his family that were in the burning car, or the woman that was about to get roughed up. You know, the police report saying White Tiger helped me subdue a suspect and all that, right? Like, it worked. And they ultimately got the acquittal, right? The jury ruled in their favor, not guilty. Hector got off. It worked. But it was an extremely selfish and hypocritical thing for Matt to do. It really was. And I know that messed with him. I could just see, like, the wheels were turning. It's like, okay, Matt, you know that was wrong. Okay? It helped you win this case. It helped you keep Hector out of prison, but you know that was wrong. That was not the right thing to do. You would not have appreciated if somebody did that to you, and there are plenty who could do that to you, including Wilson Fisk. And of course, what's he doing? He's watching from afar, and he decides to give that report to BB about how justice was not served, and vigilantes are not heroes, they're murderers, and they're allowed to walk the streets, and his anti-vigilante crusade is only starting to ramp up. Okay. And that's where the plot starts to thicken. But there's another underlying plot line that we're going to get to here at the tail end of this, right? And that's this whole Punisher cult thing. Yeah, right? Because when Matt's fighting the dirty cops, what do you see? The tattoo on the one's wrist, Punisher logo, okay? Then there's that one shot in the 3rd episode where it's like a spray-painted Punisher logo with the word triggered up above it, right? Like, there is a Punisher cult going on within the New York Police Department. And that is Kyle Rittenhouse, anyone? Just saying. Come on now. Real world. Seriously. This is where real world meets the art. This is where they intersect. This happens. And again, when it is done artfully, when it is done creatively and cleverly, I appreciate it. And it really is here, because they're not outwardly telling you shit. They're not name dropping anybody in real life. They're not saying, oh, well, this is clearly like this. No, they're just planting the seeds. And this really reminded me of the Rorschach cult from the Watchmen TV series, the limited series on HBO. This absolutely reminds me of that. There is a Punisher cult that is building. And you know what? That's real too. How many times have you been driving down the street, right? I see it all the time up here in Michigan, and you see people, the same people that have Back the Blue flags on their windshields are the same people. A lot of them have Punisher logos, right? Because they think the Punisher is on their side with respect to certain things politically, and with respect to certain things in terms of how society treats others in certain areas, right? And that's what we're seeing. There is a Punisher cult within the New York Police Department, and they're doing some shady shit, and it's definitely anti-vigilante, because the way that 3rd episode ends, we are led to believe that the Punisher, John Bernthal's Punisher, who we know is going to show up in this show because we've seen him in the trailers, we're led to believe that John Bernthal's Punisher kills Hector Ayala, shoots him in the head the next time he puts on the White Tiger hood after he was acquitted, after he was found not guilty. And, his first night out with the amulet, this is why I said the powers of the amulet clearly didn't make him bulletproof, because he just gets shot in the head by someone that, again, we're led to believe that this is the Punisher. Now, my guess is that it's not. My guess is that it is not the Punisher. Yeah, and again, this is me not knowing any inside baseball about it. I not paying attention to any production notes or any spoilers that have been dropped by anyone involved in the production. And I don't have any comic knowledge with respect to this at all, right? So if this has happened before in the comics, I am unaware of it. I'm just telling you, as someone who just watched this episode about an hour ago, I think it's misdirection. I don't think that was actually the Punisher. Maybe it was. And if it is, then that's really going to cause some problems between him and Matt, adding to the problems that they were already having, back in season 2 of Daredevil. But the thing is, we're led to believe that Punisher took him out. And, and if it wasn't him, if it wasn't John Bernthal's Punisher, if it wasn't Frank Castle, then that means that it was another member of this Punisher cult that is within the NYPD. And it totally makes sense why they would take him out, especially because he's represented not only as a threat to whatever it is they're doing, but also just, like ideologically a threat, right? The idea, these vigilantes, these people wearing masks, they're not real heroes. And again, this reminds me so much of that Rorschach cult from Watchmen, right? And how they, how Sister Night and the others dealt with them in that show. That was an amazing show. That was a fantastic show that we reviewed over at Squadcast Media some years ago when that premiered. I think, what was that, 2019, if I'm not mistaken? I own that show in glorious steelbook form as well, and I have it digitally. But yeah, that's totally what this is emblematic of. And, all of this so far, I mean, just makes for a very intriguing show, very intriguing season. Very much looking forward to next week's episode and how this plot line continues. I like the psychological and character dynamics. I like the storytelling. I like what is going on. I like all the man on the street stuff. I like all these new cast members so far. Like, this is a very enriched universe. I don't care so much about connection to the greater MCU at this point. I really don't, because quite honestly, what I asked for beforehand with Marvel Netflix, I got, right? I got a case where, Kingpin was brought in, made a connection to Hawkeye, right? Even though it wasn't on the big screen, it was still in an MCU show. But even bigger, Matt Murdock was in Spider-Man No Way Home. Okay, so we know that they're all in the same universe. The movies have acknowledged what is happening on some level in the TV series. And of course, that's the case now with respect to the TV series that they're making with WandaVision, Loki, Ms. Marvel, and all that, right? That connection is there. There is no longer a disconnect like we used to deal with between Marvel, Netflix, and the MCU. That disconnect is over, and now Daredevil has been brought back into the mix for that, rightfully so. If they decide to do that with the other characters, I don't know, but at least the flagship, because Daredevil was the flagship. Just like Arrow was the flagship for the DCCW, the Arrowverse, Daredevil was the flagship for Marvel Netflix. He and his cast of characters have been brought fully into the MCU proper, so I'm good with that. And I am looking forward to the rest of this show. So far, it has been fantastic. I've enjoyed all 3 episodes to this point. This will be one to watch weekly. We've got, 6 more episodes going. The next one, episode 4, will be next week on March 18th. I will most certainly be watching that one. And I will be right back here for a new episode of FLITE Box with respect to talking about that. This is going to be a weekly show. This is going to be a weekly occurrence, a weekly recording that I'm going to follow because, this so far is fantastic. We got 9 episodes in this season, and then we got 8 episodes for season 2, which I believe they're already in production on, if I'm not mistaken. Or, the filming on that has already started. They're filming that now. They're filming season 2 right now. So, fantastic. So far, so good. Great job. I love, just real quick, also loved the opening titles and the music. Really well done. Great tone so far. Daredevil is back. Marvel Netflix Daredevil is back, and it is now fully MCU proper. I shall rejoice in that, no doubt about it. And so that will do it for this spoiler-filled episode of FLITE Box, talking about Daredevil Born Again, episodes 1 through 3 in season 1, if you will. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening to this show. Thank you so much for supporting the FLITEcast. If you have any thoughts, spoiler-filled or otherwise, that you want to share, we can talk about this on FLITE Chat, guys. We can have spoiler conversations about this show on FLITEcast. Or on FLITE Chat, rather. This is, fair game. I know that a lot of times I'm not caught up on everything, and very graciously, you guys have held off on spoilers. We can talk spoilers on this one. We can have full-on conversations. So Anthony, Jared, Phil, anyone else, John, any of you that are watching this show currently, Alex, whoever it is, we can talk about this. Let's have chats. And anybody else that wants to join the feedback circle, for sure. Amr, one of our newcomers, you want to talk about this show if you're watching it. Absolutely. You know where to find me on Blue Sky at the Flightcast, or at Flightcast, pardon me, on Blue Sky. And there's also the Flightcast Facebook page. And of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. Don't forget the next Flight Chat episode. If you want to send any more emails for this Friday's episode of Flight Chat, send them in now up to, I'd say, about noon on Friday, because when I get home from work is when I'm, hopefully that evening is when I'm going to record that particular episode. So send those in now if you have anything that you want to update it. Otherwise, whatever emails you've sent to this point since our last episode of Flight Chat, that's what will be covered in that feedback episode this upcoming Friday. But until then, take care, stay safe out there, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.